we were briefly going to talk about Jamin's stay in jail this last time and the meds. And
Yes.
So, and we know the policies now, but if anyone has any suggestions, it's just too bad the communication works this way.
Right. If you have a loved one that is special needs or not, if you have necessary medication that you need to survive, you will not get that at the county jail, at the St. Joseph County Jail.
Not very easily.
Not very easily. Jamin has been to that jail in 3 or 4 times that I am trying to recall, but every single time I made multiple calls through the evening and spoke with deputies within the jail because of his high level of medical need. And never has that been met. And this time was no exception. We
They left about 2 o'clock?
Yes, we got there about 2 o'clock, and they already had all the medication, but they assured us that everything was going to be handled. And so we went home and we made phone calls to community mental health and even to adult protective services, because this has happened before. And in spite of all of that, we went
by 9 o'clock.
By 9 o'clock the next morning, we were at the jail for visitation. And it was during that visitation that yesterday morning that we discovered that he'd been picked up at 2 o'clock, and he hadn't had any insulin since noon with us.
Right.
And they gave him dinner and breakfast the following morning without any insulin whatsoever. And it was 10 o'clock, 9:30. Then by the time we spoke to the nurse, and she was administering that medication.
Only because we requested, and I pretty much demanded to talk to the nurse. So Ray went in to talk to Jamin.
So it wasn't until we arrived that they gave him any medication whatsoever.
I noticed that Jamin's hands were shaking, and he was very emotional, and so more so than normal. And I asked him about his meds in my hands. So I asked him about his meds, and the nurse or Jamin said that he had not had any meds, and so I demanded to talk to the nurse. She came out. They had not given him his evening meds and pills. They had not given him insulin at dinner the night before. Now, Jamin is insulin dependent, which means he needs to have insulin administered before every time he eats. He should not have a bite of food without having his blood sugar checked and his insulin adjusted. And then he also has a 24-hour insulin that he takes every single morning, and then he has his pills that he takes every morning. And these are all a whole plethora of pills for all different medical reasons, including mood stabilization meds. And he had not had any of those. And so the nurse did assure us that she would make sure his insulin was correct. The previous time he had been to jail back in September of last year, his blood sugar was like over 500 when we picked him up, and it's supposed to be in the low 100s.
Yeah.
And so very quickly he would have either a diabetic coma or even more behaviors because his blood sugar's off. So these are life-saving meds.
Right.
So
as we mentioned in an earlier video, we brought Jamin here right after being. We left the jail, and we were gone 20 minutes, and they called and said they were discharging him from the jail. So we went back.
CMH called, yeah.
CMH called. So by that time, he had his medication administered, so we thought. And so we came to the hospital, and during the admission process here, he had an anxiety attack and another episode, and that actually helped them to see his behavior in real time. And so in hindsight, it actually helped. But in administering,
it's always scary to go through.
Right, but people were still put at risk. Police were involved, and it was a lot of drama at the hospital. There were some elderly people that were frightened in the emergency room. And when Jamin was having his meds administered this morning, he was still groggy. After all of that, he crashed, and he really was kind of crashed until I gave him those meds this morning. And as he was struggling to take those meds from me, he pulled out his new ADHD medication and started to hand it to Kim, and she said, no, you need to take that. So he took it.
I thought that was a little weird.
And we thought that was strange. So 2.5 hours later now, Jamin says to me,
after he's
now under the effects of his ADHD medication, he looks bright and
he's lucid, he's aware.
Yes. And he clearly says, the nurse yesterday at the jail didn't give me my ADHD medication and said that I was not allowed to have it.
Now this was unprompted.
Nobody asked him. And this was unprompted. No one asked him. He just mentioned it.
Yeah.
And so as my wife and I began to talk, well, now at this point I've made a phone call to Mark Lillywhite at the sheriff's office, because there was no documentation of this. There was no, and keep in mind now, we also turned around and went back and got Jamin 20 minutes after this. So this was all fresh, the situation was. And if
meds.
that pill was kept from him, it's a controlled substance.
So where is it?
It wasn't given back to us. There was no chain of custody for it. And so now at least that message is now on Mark Lillywhite's voicemail. And I left that because I guess of the sensitive nature of this. It wasn't communicated to me, and I'm his legal guardian, or it wasn't communicated to Jamin that he was getting that pill back, although it was communicated to him that it was being kept.
But it was not communicated to the guardian.
Right.
That it was not communicated to the guardian that Jamin hadn't had that med. So that explains part of the reason that there was such a violent episode yesterday, because he was without that medication.
Right.
And then it's twofold. We then asked the nurse here. The nurse documented that and said, "Oh, that's very important. That we should have known that." Mm-hmm. But also
go ahead and show
that
us.
now I forgot what I was going to say. What was I going to say?
You were talking about the nurse.
The nurse came in, documented it.
Yep.
And that would have been important to know that he didn't have that yesterday.
Right.
And so, but she also confirmed. She also confirmed they don't give those controlled substances in the jail system. So if you do have any loved ones that have to be on one of those meds that might need to spend a night in jail, be aware. Apparently, they're not allowed to give those meds in the jail system.
Right.
So at least now we know. So this is for informational purposes, but we should have been told that he wasn't given that med. They put us at risk. They put everyone in this hospital at risk in the very beginning. It took 3 police officers and a security guard and Ray to chase him down in the hospital.
Right.
And he finally
and now someone else is in possession of his private medication.
Well, and so
when he's not in custody.
Maybe their protocol is to just get rid of it. We don't know, because this has not been communicated. So that's when I said a better method of communication could have saved it. Jamin could have accidentally hurt somebody yesterday during this tirade or episode, or he's running around loose around the hospital and our parking lot and
fighting the system from hurting Jamin and us has been the biggest obstacle. It's ineptness, and it's the human factor.
Yeah.
You can only expect so much from human beings. You can only expect so much perfection from professionals.
Right.
That and so don't expect perfection from professionals, I guess, is really the accurate thing to say. And if you do find it, praise it, because you can't hardly find it anywhere.
Yeah, and people that are supposed to be working together sometimes feels like they're working against you. Mm-hmm. And then you have, an autistic behavioral kid on top of everything else. So anyway.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that sums it up. So any suggestions, comments, and all right, thanks. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.